Imagine your tax dollars, your hard-earned money, ending up in the hands of Al-Qaeda. Not a story from the news, not a hypothetical. This is happening right now. And it starts in Minnesota. Yes, Minnesota, the land of lakes, the land of progressive experiments, now under investigation for possibly funding a terrorist group overseas. Let's unpack how this could have happened, who's responsible, and why it matters for every American patriot. Breaking news has erupted from Minnesota, and it isn't your typical political story. The Trump administration is now investigating whether state tax dollars may have found their way to Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda-affiliated extremist group operating in Somalia. For patriotic Americans who care about national security, this is not just alarming, it's outrageous. Imagine this, your hard-earned tax money. Money meant to build schools, fix roads, and support citizens in need, possibly being funneled into the hands of terrorists halfway around the world. It sounds like the premise of a spy thriller, but this is real life, and the stakes could not be higher. Minnesota has a long history of funding refugee resettlement programs. These programs are intended to help vulnerable populations rebuild their lives in the United States. That's noble. But here's the catch. Some of these programs are connected to communities with ties to Somalia, a nation plagued by civil war, corruption, and extremist groups like Al-Shabaab. In other words, well-intentioned taxpayer dollars could be walking a tightrope over a minefield of national security risks. Al-Shabaab has not been idle. For years, this extremist group has waged a brutal insurgency across Somalia. They've targeted civilians, attacked government institutions, and plotted terror operations that stretch across continents. They are a threat to global stability, and any connection, direct or indirect, to American funds must be treated with the utmost seriousness. President Trump has publicly commented on this investigation, framing it as yet another example of government negligence. In statements made at recent rallies, he questioned how such programs could operate without proper oversight, asking, "How does Minnesota let our taxpayer money flow into places we don't even know? Are they funding terrorists? Are they funding chaos? It's a disgrace." His words aren't just political theater. They're a call to action for Americans concerned about protecting our country. Critics may argue that refugee programs are essential humanitarian tools. That is true. But good intentions cannot excuse sloppy execution. When the risk of funds reaching extremists exists, the stakes are national security, and oversight isn't optional. It's mandatory. Let's backtrack for a moment. How did we get here? Minnesota's refugee resettlement programs have funneled significant state funds into nonprofits tasked with supporting displaced populations. Some of these nonprofits work internationally, including in Somalia. Ideally, the funds are used for housing, food, medical care, and education. But, as history has shown, even the best-intentioned aid can be misappropriated. Terrorist networks have exploited humanitarian channels before, converting aid into recruitment, weapons, or propaganda. The Trump administration's investigation is essentially following a trail. They want to know if, somewhere along this complex web of funding, taxpayer dollars could have been diverted, intentionally or not, into the hands of extremists. Think of it like following a river upstream, tracing every tributary until you reach the source. The goal is clarity, accountability, and, above all, security. Minnesota officials have defended their programs, insisting that funds are for helping refugees rebuild their lives in the United States. They emphasize that most participants are law-abiding, peaceful individuals fleeing conflict. And this is undoubtedly true. But national security isn't about probabilities, it's about certainty. A single misdirected dollar can have consequences that reverberate across continents. This story also exposes a glaring problem with oversight in humanitarian programs. How are organizations vetted? How are funds tracked once they leave the state's control? How often do audits occur? For patriotic Americans, these questions strike at the core of trust in government. Your money should not be a free-floating resource that could end up empowering terrorists. Here's where politics enters the story. Trump's critics argue that he's politicizing a humanitarian program for his base. But to many Americans, this is more than politics, it's common sense. We cannot allow bureaucratic mismanagement to create loopholes that jeopardize national security. Trump's focus on this issue is a reminder that leadership isn't just about speeches, it's about accountability and results. Consider the metaphor of a garden. If you plant seeds in fertile soil, you expect flowers to grow, not weeds or poisonous plants. But if you neglect oversight, weeds can sprout, choking the life out of your garden. That's the danger here. Minnesota's well-meaning programs could, without proper checks, become a garden where extremists find resources they shouldn't. Al-Shabaab's influence isn't limited to Somalia. They have connections and sympathizers abroad. Funds that reach them can finance operations that threaten American interests directly or indirectly. Even a small leak in the system can have catastrophic consequences. Let's not forget history. Similar situations have occurred before, where international aid meant for humanitarian purposes was exploited by terrorist groups. For instance, during the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, there were documented cases of resources intended for civilians being diverted to extremist organizations. These aren't hypothetical scenarios. They are real lessons that policymakers should heed. Trump's statements and public pressure highlight an important principle. American taxpayer money should always serve American interests first. Humanitarian aid is important, but it must be carefully controlled and meticulously monitored. When oversight fails, the consequences are not just political, they are potentially deadly. Minnesota's challenge is now twofold. Ensure that current programs are secure and restore public trust. Transparency is essential. Every dollar must be accounted for, and every nonprofit receiving funds must be rigorously vetted. This is not an ideological question. It's about security and responsibility. The investigation also raises broader questions about U.S. foreign policy and domestic funding practices. Should states have the authority to direct funds internationally without federal oversight? How do we balance compassion for refugees with the imperative to protect American citizens? These questions aren't just academic. They have real-world consequences for every taxpayer. Trump's approach underscores a fundamental belief in accountability. He's not arguing that aid shouldn't exist. He's arguing that it must be carefully controlled. In his words, we love helping people, but we can't help the wrong people, and we can't let our money be used against us. That's a sentiment that resonates with patriotic Americans who want their government to protect national interests. The political implications are significant. Democrats and state officials face scrutiny over program management, while Trump uses this story to position himself as a defender of American taxpayers and national security. It's a clash of priorities. Bureaucratic compassion versus vigilant oversight. This isn't just a story about Minnesota or Al-Shabaab. It's a story about accountability in government, about ensuring that taxpayer dollars are never misdirected, and about protecting the homeland from threats both near and far. Every American has a stake in the outcome. Let's look at the human side for a moment. Refugees deserve help. Innocent people fleeing conflict should find safety and support in the United States. But terrorists don't deserve a free ride. Oversight ensures that compassion doesn't become a cover for danger. The Trump administration's investigation is also sending a message to the rest of the country. No government program is above scrutiny. Citizens have a right to know where their money goes, and public servants have a duty to prevent it from fueling extremism. Some may say this investigation will create fear among immigrant communities. That's not the point. The point is vigilance. Ensuring that funds reach only the intended recipients is not fear, it's responsibility. It's about safeguarding both the nation and the integrity of humanitarian programs. As the investigation unfolds, Americans will be watching. Will Minnesota tighten oversight? Will nonprofits improve accountability? Will taxpayer money ever be diverted to dangerous groups? These questions are not just policy details. They strike at the heart of trust in government. Trump's focus on this issue also ties into his broader agenda. Putting America first, ensuring that every dollar spent strengthens American security, supports citizens, and prevents terrorism is consistent with the principles that his base values most. It's a reminder that leadership requires vigilance, courage, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The story also highlights a broader lesson. Government programs, no matter how well-intentioned, require rigorous oversight. History is full of examples where neglect or poor management allowed resources to be misused. Minnesota now finds itself at a crossroads. Will it act decisively to ensure accountability, or will bureaucratic inertia allow risks to persist? Al-Shabaab is not waiting. Every day they have access to resources, whether through donations, aid diversion, or other means. They can plan attacks, recruit, and spread extremist ideology. The consequences of mismanaged funds can ripple far beyond Somalia's borders. For patriotic Americans, this is a wake-up call. Taxpayer money should serve American interests. Security, accountability, and vigilance are not partisan issues. They are matters of survival in an increasingly complex and dangerous world. Trump's comments, rallies, and public pressure have made this more than an investigative story. It's a statement about what it means to protect America. It's a call to action for citizens to demand transparency, accountability, and leadership that prioritizes national security above bureaucratic convenience. As this story develops, Americans will be paying close attention. How will Minnesota respond? Will oversight improve? Will taxpayers see their money used responsibly? And most importantly, will the risks of extremist funding be mitigated before disaster strikes? This isn't a distant problem. It's here, in our communities, in our state budgets, and in our conscience as citizens. The investigation is a chance to set a precedent that American taxpayer money will never be used to fund those who wish to harm America or its allies. Trump's focus on Minnesota is consistent with his philosophy: defend the homeland, protect citizens, and hold government accountable. It's a lesson for every state and every federal program. Intentions are not enough. Results matter, oversight matters, and above all, national security matters. The stakes could not be higher. Minnesota's programs and taxpayer funds are under a microscope, and the consequences of mismanagement could be felt worldwide. This investigation is about accountability, patriotism, and the duty of government to safeguard the American people. So here's the takeaway for every American patriot. Vigilance matters. Oversight matters. And leadership means ensuring that every dollar of your money strengthens America, not its enemies. What do you think? Should Minnesota tighten oversight of refugee resettlement programs? Should the federal government step in to ensure no funds ever reach extremists? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown eye-opening, like, subscribe, and share, because this story is far from over, and the safety of our nation is on the line.